The soft glow of the antique chandelier reflected off the polished oak dining table where my entire family had gathered to celebrate my grandfather's 82nd birthday. Crystal glasses sparkled beside expensive china plates while the aroma of roasted lamb and fresh rosemary filled the room. Every seat around the table was occupied by someone who believed they were successful. My older brother, Andrew, couldn't stop talking about the luxury apartment he had just purchased overlooking the harbor. Every few minutes he flashed the keys to his brand new Mercedes, making sure everyone noticed the silver logo resting on the key fob. Across from him, my sister Caroline admired the diamond bracelet her husband had given her for their anniversary. "It's custom made," she said proudly, lifting her wrist under the chandelier. "Only 3 of these were ever produced." Mom smiled with obvious pride. "Our children have done so well for themselves." Her eyes slowly shifted toward me. "Well, most of them." The familiar silence settled over my end of the table. I quietly continued cutting my food into small pieces, pretending I hadn't heard the comment. At 29 years old, I had become the family disappointment. While everyone else believed I barely made enough money to survive, I drove a 10-year-old sedan, rented a small apartment downtown, and worked as what they believed was an ordinary financial analyst for a regional investment office. To them, I lacked ambition. To me, I simply valued privacy. Nobody at that table knew the truth, and I intended to keep it that way, at least until they forced my hand. Grandfather cleared his throat before smiling warmly. "So, Ethan," he said, looking at me, "how has work been?" Before I could answer, Andrew laughed. "Work? He spends all day staring at spreadsheets." Several cousins laughed with him. Caroline shook her head sympathetically. "I honestly don't understand you." I looked up. "What don't you understand?" "You graduated first in your university class," she replied. "Companies were fighting to hire you." She leaned forward. "And somehow you ended up working in a tiny office earning less than my assistant." Mom sighed dramatically. "I still remember when we thought you'd become the most successful child." Dad placed his wine glass on the table with a quiet clink. "We invested everything in your education." His voice grew colder. "And what did we get in return?" Nobody answered. Dad answered his own question. "Nothing." Andrew smirked. "You know what your problem is." I shrugged. "No. You think small." He pointed toward the large windows overlooking my parents' estate. "People become wealthy by taking risks." I almost laughed. If only he knew. Caroline nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly." She looked around the table before adding loudly, "You still drive that old sedan." Another cousin joined in. "I saw him parking it last week." Someone else laughed. "I thought it belonged to one of the gardeners." The table erupted with laughter. Even Mom smiled. Grandfather remained unusually quiet. His eyes stayed fixed on me as though he were trying to read something hidden beneath the surface. I simply took another sip of water. There was no point defending myself, because every expensive thing my family owned had one thing in common. None of them had actually paid for it. Dad leaned back confidently. "I've been discussing something important with your mother." My stomach tightened slightly. Whenever Dad used that tone, it meant he had already made a decision. He folded his hands together. "We believe it's time you learned responsibility." I looked directly at him. "What do you mean?" Andrew exchanged an excited glance with Caroline. Mom answered instead. "We've decided to stop helping you." I frowned. "Helping me?" "The monthly family support," Dad explained. "It ends today." Around the table, several relatives nodded approvingly. "You've depended on this family long enough," Caroline added. Andrew smiled. "Maybe now you'll finally push yourself." I stared at them in silence. For nearly a minute nobody spoke. Finally I asked, "So you've all agreed on this?" Dad nodded confidently. "Every single one of us." Mom smiled as though she were doing me a favor. "This is tough love." Andrew folded his arms. "If you can't survive without our help." He shrugged. That's your own fault. I slowly placed my knife and fork on my plate. Then I reached beside my chair and picked up my leather briefcase. Andrew laughed. What are you doing? I need my laptop. Dad frowned. This isn't the time to check emails. I calmly removed my computer and opened it. Caroline rolled her eyes. Honestly, Ethan. Can we finish this conversation first? I ignored her. After entering 2 passwords and completing a biometric scan, my secure dashboard appeared. The room remained quiet. Then I slowly turned the screen toward everyone. Across the center of the display appeared one figure. Personal investment holdings. $612,847,913. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Andrew blinked twice. Caroline leaned forward. Mom looked confused. Dad squinted as though the number might somehow change if he stared long enough. Finally, Andrew laughed nervously. Nice joke. I calmly closed the laptop. I wasn't joking. Dad's expression hardened. Enough. He waved his hand dismissively. Anyone can create a fake screen. I nodded. You're right. Before I could continue, the front doorbell echoed throughout the house. Our housekeeper entered the dining room. Mr. Lawson. Dad looked irritated. What is it? There are several people here asking for Mr. Ethan Lawson. The room fell silent. Dad frowned. Who? The housekeeper checked a small notepad. A gentleman from Continental Private Bank. She looked down again. Another from Sterling Capital. And 2 attorneys from Hamilton Legal Group. My family exchanged confused looks. Dad stood. There must be some mistake. The housekeeper shook her head. They specifically asked for Mr. Ethan Lawson. I smiled slightly. They're right on time. Andrew looked at me. You know these people. I invited them. Dad stared. For what? I closed my laptop and stood. Because I expected tonight's conversation. Mom's confidence disappeared. What are you talking about? Before I answered, 4 sharply dressed professionals entered the dining room. Leading them was an elderly gentleman wearing a navy suit with a gold Continental Private Bank lapel pin. The moment he saw me, he smiled warmly. Mr. Lawson. He extended his hand. My apologies for interrupting dinner. I shook it. No problem, Mr. Bennett. He opened a leather portfolio. We've prepared the documents authorizing the transfer of your newest investment portfolio and the acquisition of the additional commercial properties. The room became perfectly still. Dad finally spoke. I'm sorry. He looked between us. Who exactly are you? The gentleman smiled politely. My name is Charles Bennett. He handed Dad an elegant business card. I'm president of Continental Private Bank. Dad's face lost its color. Mr. Bennett continued without noticing. Our board approved Mr. Lawson's latest acquisition this afternoon. He turned toward me. Congratulations. The transaction officially increases your controlling interests across 12 companies. Andrew slowly lowered his wine glass. Caroline whispered, 12 companies. I watched every face around the table as disbelief slowly replaced arrogance. None of them realized the biggest surprise was still waiting outside the front door. The silence in the dining room became almost unbearable. No one reached for their food. No one touched their wine. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on Charles Bennett, the president of Continental Private Bank. My father finally found his voice. I'm sorry, he said cautiously, but there has to be some misunderstanding. My son works as a financial analyst. Mr. Bennett looked genuinely confused. A financial analyst. He glanced at me. Mr. Lawson, should I explain? I nodded. I think it's time. Mr. Bennett placed a thick leather folder on the dining table. Mr. Ethan Lawson has never been an ordinary analyst. He slowly opened the folder and removed several documents. For the past 6 years, he has been the founder and majority owner of Lawson Capital Partners, one of the fastest growing private investment firms in the country. Andrew laughed nervously. That's impossible. Mr. Bennett calmly slid the first document across the table. the company's registration certificate. Next came audited financial statements, then a valuation report prepared by an international accounting firm. Across the front page, one figure immediately caught everyone's attention. Estimated company value, $1.84 billion. Caroline's mouth slowly opened. Dad adjusted his glasses before reading the document again. Then a third time. No. He whispered. No, this can't be right. It is, I answered quietly. I simply chose not to tell anyone. Mother looked completely lost. But why? I leaned back in my chair. Because every conversation in this family revolves around money. Nobody interrupted. You never asked whether I was happy. You never asked whether I enjoyed my work. You only asked how much I earned. Grandfather slowly smiled. I've been waiting years for this day. Everyone turned toward him. You knew. I asked. He nodded. I invested in Ethan's first company. Andrew looked shocked. You what? Grandfather folded his hands. 6 years ago, he came to me asking for advice. He didn't ask for money. He asked how to build something without depending on anyone. I smiled. I still remember your answer. Grandfather chuckled. I told you to stay quiet until your success could speak for itself. Mr. Bennett continued. Mr. Lawson currently owns controlling interests in 12 manufacturing businesses, 4 technology companies, 2 shipping firms, and several commercial real estate developments. Andrew slowly sat back down. His confidence had completely disappeared. But, he whispered, how? I answered honestly. I lived below my means. I reinvested every dollar. I worked weekends. I studied while everyone else was on vacation. I built relationships instead of showing off. Caroline lowered her eyes. I thought you were struggling. I let you think that. Dad stared across the table. Then all those family dinners. I nodded. I came because I wanted a family. Not because I needed anything. Charles Bennett removed another folder. There is one final matter. He looked directly at me. The board has approved your purchase of Sterling Industrial Systems. Dad frowned. Sterling Industrial. Mr. Bennett nodded. The company finalized the acquisition this afternoon. Dad's face turned pale. That's our largest supplier. It was. Mr. Bennett corrected politely. It now belongs to Mr. Lawson. The room became silent again. Andrew looked ready to faint. Does that mean? It means, I answered calmly, your businesses will now negotiate contracts with my company. Mother covered her mouth. Dad slowly stood. For the first time in my life, he looked small. Ethan. His voice trembled. We judged you. Yes. We were wrong. Yes. I don't know how to apologize. I looked around the table. Every person who had laughed at me only 30 minutes earlier now avoided eye contact. Some stared at the floor. Others stared at the documents. Nobody was smiling anymore. I could have embarrassed them. I could have reminded them of every insult, every joke, every cruel comment. Instead, I quietly closed the folders. I never wanted revenge. Everyone looked at me. I wanted respect. Grandfather smiled proudly. That's the difference between wealth and wisdom. Charles Bennett gathered the remaining paperwork. Mr. Lawson, the board meeting begins tomorrow at 9. I'll be there. As he prepared to leave, my father suddenly spoke again. Will you help us? The question surprised everyone. I took a long breath before answering. I'll do what good business leaders do. Dad looked hopeful. I'll help people willing to help themselves. I looked directly at Andrew. If you want investment, bring me a real business plan. Then Caroline. If you want advice, I'll gladly give it. Finally, my parents. But I'm done funding appearances. No more pretending. No more measuring success by cars, watches, or houses. Grandfather slowly raised his glass. To the only person at this table who became wealthy without losing his character. For the first time that evening, no one laughed. They simply lifted their glasses in silence. When dinner finally ended, I walked outside alone. The cool night air felt different. Lighter. My old sedan still sat exactly where I had parked it. Andrew followed me into the driveway. "I owe you an apology." I smiled. "You don't owe me words." He looked confused. "You owe me change." Months later, things looked very different. Andrew sold the luxury cars he couldn't truly afford and started rebuilding his business honestly. Caroline stopped chasing social status and focused on serving her clients. My parents sold one of their vacation homes and simplified their lifestyle. As for me, I never bought a mansion or a sports car. I still drove my old sedan for another year, not because I couldn't afford something better, but because it reminded me of a lesson I never wanted to forget. The loudest people in the room often have the least to prove. Real success doesn't need applause. It quietly waits until the truth speaks for itself.